and you got to get ready for this thing in any number of ways, but this is a totally different perspective. So let me bring in Kevin Cole from Unexpected Points, Unexpected Points. Now, Kevin, give me a little bit on the bio so we know who you are and kind of what your story is and kind of what perspective you come from.
Sure. Maybe I'll go a little bit in reverse chronological
give us
order.
The 30-second bio.
Yeah, let us know who you are.
So PFF before this, as a data scientist, someone who's looked into the insights that come from not only the data that they had at PFF, but also some tracking data and other things that are available publicly, and trying to find basically edges that you can get. And I think you're right, this draft discussion, how I'm looking at it is a little bit different. Most people are looking at player evaluation. I'm looking at to see how can we enhance that player evaluation by looking at some broader metrics and tilt the odds in the favor of different teams.
So I say this with respect. It's more of and you put it in your article, it's more of a nerdy look at how to draft as opposed to an inside scouting look. And there's a tremendous amount of value in that, because if all you have is scouts, cool, they can all put together like who looks better than who else, but then how do you build a team appropriately and get the right value? So that's kind of the background. I'm fascinated by this idea of surplus value that you wrote about. Can you give us a description of what does that mean?
Yeah. So what it means is that if you think about building an NFL team as you have a hard salary cap, you have a few different ways of acquiring players: free agency, trading, and the draft. And you're trying to find the best way to fit those players in within that constraint of the salary cap. So what the draft really provides in benefit is it provides two different things. It provides, of course, and what we focus on a lot is kind of the access to talent, the talent that's out there. They're first initially acquired through the draft. And of course, there are undrafted free agents, but we'll set those aside for a second at right now. And the second thing that it gives everyone is cost control. These rookie contracts are locked in, and for the most part, on average, they're going to be players drafted at a certain selection are going to give you more benefit than the equivalent player, the equivalent value player, the equivalent worth of a player in free agency or in trade or on a second or third contract, something like that. So it's really looking at these draft picks and deciding, okay, how much of a benefit are we getting there? And that cost savings can then be applied other ways and build a better roster overall.
And as you dig in and you start to understand that value, what jumps out to you?
Well, I think positional value, which has been talked about a lot, I mean, that's something where if you come from the assumption that it's not that player evaluation doesn't matter, it's more that people are so good at player evaluation on an individual basis, and they have so much information. We have some of the best, most knowledgeable football people out there throughout all of these 32 NFL teams. If you set that aside and you say, okay, we can get a little bit better there, we want to be as best as we can there, but we know that we have to be a little bit different to try to get some value. I think there's a few different things that jump out. I mean, trading in the draft is one area that I like to look at for the value you can gain there, mostly trading back, but there can be some other circumstances. Positional value, so targeting the right positions at the right points in the draft based upon what we've seen historically, and the ones that give the most value, so you're getting the highest valuation on a second contract from those types of players, but at a lower cost on the rookie contract. And then the last thing is looking at this concept of reaching for a player or getting a value on a player. And you can quantify a little bit there with, normally if you're reaching on a player versus a consensus, it's worse than the benefit of getting a player on a value. And you can adjust all three of those things, and I combine those all to look at draft grades. That's how I grade teams afterwards, rather than just looking at the specific players.
So, just looking at I like the way you tiered the positions in terms of positional value. It's not an exact description, but essentially big people matter.
Yes, big people matter. And again, this is being derived from what the NFL values. So this is not my personal opinion necessarily, or some keen insight from the data. It's more saying, what are people willing to pay a lot of money for? What are NFL GMs willing to pay a lot of money for? So of course you have the quarterback, but if we set that aside, the other positions I would say, what I put into the tier one right now are edge rushers, offensive tackles, and interior defensive linemen, but mostly that falls into the category of those who are pass rushers. And not only are they paid a lot of money, So that factors into the equation. But there are also players that are more difficult to find who end up becoming elite later on in the draft. So that's another thing. There's like a scarcity to being able to find these players once we get into the second, third, fourth, fifth round. So that raises and enhances their value in the first round. And if they're really, really good at these positions, especially something like offensive tackle, they just don't hit the free agency market that much. So if you're thinking holistically on how to build a team, you more often have to find these players if you want to find an elite or an above average player within the draft. And that's why their value raises even higher as far as the draft pick is concerned.
You know, I think one of the challenges Mike and I have had, and especially Michael, over the last, I don't know, decade or so with the interior offensive line struggles with the Seahawks is, hey, man, hold on a second. This isn't the NFL of 30 years ago. You know, if you were on 30 years ago with us, it would be the same thing. Tackles, pass rushers, quarterbacks, all very valuable. But now these defensive linemen go up and down the line of scrimmage, especially in nickel situations. Now these D tackles aren't Ted Washington, right? They're not slugs sitting in there just eating space. Now these guys up and down the line are all highly dynamic. Why hasn't the value of offensive guards elevated with the value of those defensive tackles?
I mean, I would say it has elevated, maybe not on the same scale as the defensive tackles, but it has definitely gone up quite a bit. If you look at not center as much, but when we're talking about guards, the values have gone up quite a bit. There are a number of high free agency signings that we've seen over the years. I would just say within the draft, though, it is a position where elite talent does hit the free agent market, where you do not see that as often for guys who are on the outside for offensive tackles. And I think part of that is structurally in the NFL, there's one franchise tag amount for the entire offensive line. So the cost that you're going to have as a team if you decide to franchise a player, if you franchise a guard versus a tackle or a center versus a tackle, you're not really getting as much benefit because those tackles make more money. So because of that, they end up on the free agent market a little bit more. And maybe that lowers their value a little bit when we look at the first or second round in the NFL draft. You don't have to spend there. If you want to have a boatload of money that you saved because of other positions, other great draft picks you've made, you can invest that more often in a guard than you could in a tackle and get a higher level of talent in free agency.
Talking to Kevin Cole, who writes Unexpected Points and wrote a really just tremendous piece on how to look at the draft in a different way. So how do you factor in needs? How do you factor in team philosophies? The Ravens want to be physical. Another team wants to throw it all over the yard and needs wide receivers in order to do that. How do you take this surplus value chart, essentially, and factor in the type of team you want to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. Again, I would think about it from a perspective of, again, looking at free agency and the draft together a little bit here. And free agency comes before the NFL draft, which is different in the NBA. It kind of works the other way around. So sometimes you don't know who you're going to draft first until you've already gone through free agency. So I'd say if you're a team that has particular needs in certain areas that you can't be certain of the fact that you're going to find them maybe in the best value ranges during the NFL draft, you probably want to invest a bit more of that in free agency. And then when it comes to the draft, I mean, there can be incremental differences in how you're going to want to value these players. But I think generally when teams are drafting for need, it's something to consider. But at the same point in time, the roster that we see right now versus the roster we see on, the kickoff week to 4 weeks into the season to 10 weeks into the season, there's a lot of chaos that ends up happening here. So that's why I think if you consistently draft high value players at high value positions in those early rounds and you work around being able to fill out those needs and the unique aspects of your team around that, I think over time that'll pay off.
So just quickly, you said that you grade teams at the end of these drafts. I don't know that you have your grades from previous years in front of you, but I would imagine a few years ago when the Seahawks drafted Devin Witherspoon, a corner number 5, and then went wide receiver with JSN number 20, two positions that are in tier 2 for you, that probably wasn't an incredibly highly rated draft for you.
Let me pull it up here now that we have it. Overall, last year I had the Seahawks looking pretty good. So there are differences in these positions. I just want to maybe just lay out quickly. There is a relative difference, but we're talking about surplus value differences between drafting a cornerback versus, let's say, an edge rusher in that type of position. It's only going to be maybe 3, 4, 5 million in savings that we're talking about here on a $270 something million cap. So it's not going to, sink or swim your draft there. But these start to accumulate when you have 50 different players who are on your roster for a team. So that was a slight difference in there. But the Seahawks did well via trade and did well overall, I think, positionally in those drafts. So I actually rated them being the 8th best draft last year in total surplus value gained.
How about the year before? I think what Salk's pointing to was
it was 2 years ago. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago with Spoon at 5, JSN at 20.
Because last year you go D-tackle in the first round with Byron Murphy. I mean, I would assume that probably rates highly.
Okay, yeah. So the Seahawks are a little bit lower, but actually not as bad as you might think. Again, what they've done is consistently these what seem like smaller trades picked up a lot of trading value. So it's one of those things where I think, positionally it was a little bit down in the 2023 draft, but was overcome. It was offset by trading value, and then also some decent discipline. Hasn't been as good in some of these prior years when you look at consensus big board versus where these players have been drafted. So it was a little bit lower 2 years ago, but it helps when you're able to consistently gain a little bit of value through trading back in the draft.
I think we've learned in baseball, there's a lot of you guys in all sorts of analytics departments all across Major League Baseball. Are there many Kevins in NFL front offices right now?
There are more than there used to be. I think what's kind of precipitated more people being brought in is the fact that there's all this tracking data that's now available to teams, which is really difficult to grasp any insight from if you don't have people who can, find millions of lines of data and be able how to sort and figure those things out. It's growing. I think there's also been a little bit of turnover for ownership. It all starts at the top, and we've had some owners come in who are from, big money. We've seen a lot of big money owners who probably have, built out businesses elsewhere, which have really relied heavily upon analytics. So that's happened. And then a little bit of young blood when it comes to GMs who have come in who are more able to grasp what's going on there. So it's happening, it's building, but it's not a universal thing. And within baseball teams, they almost have their own departments, their own little mini tech companies within a baseball team. We haven't gotten to that point in the NFL beyond a couple of teams, maybe.
It makes sense. There's not that much money in the NFL. So these poor teams, they can't possibly afford to build that out.
Is it true that Salk told you before the segment started to say things like chasing edges if you want to work with the Seahawks? Is that true or false?
No, I was not told that, but I'm sure there are a few different good phrases you can throw in.
That's Mike McDonald's big phrase. All right, last thing. Who is good at this around the league at surplus value? Who's good at finding it? Who is bad at finding surplus value?
Well, the thing is, it really varies on a year-by-year basis. So I think if we're looking at not just surplus value, but overall, one of the best teams we've seen for the last several years has been the Baltimore Ravens with how they've approached things. They've been ahead of the curve when it comes to hiring people in these sorts of areas. And when it drives getting this value, some of it is players, even though they take a Kyle Hamilton every now and again in the first round. And if you look at safeties, you might not think that's one of the highest players. But I think at that point in time, that they figured they were getting an elite talent at a top 5 sort of talent outside of the top 10. So they're good there. What they've always been very good at is letting players go to get compensatory picks. They're kind of the compensatory pick masters. And then also trading back and being really smart with their contracts. So again, it all comes together. But the Ravens are definitely a team that stands out.
Well, we appreciate it. Thanks for doing this. Well, we really do appreciate you guys watching our videos.
And remember, you can like it, you can subscribe it, you can download the Seattle Sports app so you never miss a minute.